Shock waves of pure fear ripped through Solaris's body as the elite Saurian soldier watched Earth's defense fleet unleash a storm of tungsten rods, plasma beams, and nuclear torpedoes that shredded his invasion force to molten scraps. The primitive species called humans weren't so primitive after all. His strike team had just captured a pirate base and freed the hostages. Solaris thought this raid against the humans would be as easy as swatting bugs. His commanders assured him human technology was weak, their population centers vulnerable. But those intelligence reports couldn't have been more wrong. The moment Solaris's invasion fleet entered the solar system, the humans reacted with ruthless precision. Their warships were as advanced as anything in the Saurian armada. Orbital defense platforms, bristling with devastating weapons, surrounded the blue-green planet. Solaris watched helplessly as a swarm of human attack craft intercepted his landing ships, blasting them apart with missiles and energy beams. Automated gun turrets on the moon base tore gaping holes in his fleet's hulls. Within minutes, half of Solaris's ships were reeking hulks, venting atmosphere and bodies. The humans had been ready for them, and they weren't pulling any punches. This was no easy conquest against savages. It was a fight for survival against a powerful, technologically advanced foe. For the first time in his military career, Solaris felt pure, primal fear. Solaris slammed his fist on the console. "All ships retreat! Fall back to the rally point!" His heart raced as he watched the remnants of his once proud fleet turn tail and flee. But the humans weren't content to let them escape. Their ships chased after the Saurians' missiles and energy beams, slicing into the rearmost vessels. A desperate idea formed in Solaris's mind. He opened a channel to his remaining ships. "All vessels continue retreat. I will lead a diversionary attack to draw off the humans. Escape while you can." He cut the link before anyone could protest. Solaris spun his ship around and charged at the human fleet, weapons blazing. He targeted their command ship, hoping to disrupt their pursuit. His crew unleashed everything they had, pouring fire into the human vessel's shields. The rest of the Saurian fleet sped away as the humans swarmed Solaris's lone ship. Consoles exploded, and sparks flew as the humans returned fire. Solaris gripped his chair as the deck shuddered beneath him. Alarms wailed and acrid smoke filled the bridge. A tremendous jolt nearly flung him to the floor. The ship groaned like a wounded beast. "Shields down, hull breaches on all decks," his tactical officer reported. "Human boarding craft latching on." Solaris drew his sidearm. If this was to be his end, he would face it like a true Saurian warrior. The bridge doors hissed open, and armored figures poured through, weapons raised. The humans cut down Solaris's bridge crew with ruthless efficiency. In seconds, Solaris was the only one left standing. A dozen pulse rifles were trained on him. He raised his gun, determined to take at least one of them with him. But before he could pull the trigger, one of the human soldiers stepped forward and removed his helmet. Solaris blinked in surprise. The man had pale skin, close-cropped hair, and piercing blue eyes. He holstered his rifle and held up a hand. "I'm Captain Will Evans, United Earth Marine Corps. Let's talk." Solaris stared at him, confusion swirling through his mind. Why wasn't the human killing him? His finger tightened on the trigger, but something in the human's eyes made him hesitate. He slowly lowered the gun. Evans stepped closer, keeping his hands visible. "You're wounded, let me help." Solaris looked down and saw blue blood seeping from a gash on his arm. He hadn't even noticed. Evans pulled out a medkit and began dressing the wound. As he worked, Evans spoke in a calm, even tone. "There's no need for more death today. If we keep fighting, both our peoples will suffer. Surely there must be a way to resolve this conflict peacefully." Solaris couldn't believe what he was hearing. A human showing mercy, proposing peace. It went against everything he'd been taught about their species. He met Evans' gaze and saw only sincerity there, no trace of deceit or aggression. "Why should I trust you?" Solaris asked, his voice rough. "Your people could have wiped us out, but you stayed your hand. Why?" Evans finished bandaging Solaris's arm and sat back. "We're not the monsters your leaders think we are. Humans value life in all its forms. We believe every sentient being has the right to live freely, without oppression or tyranny. Solaris shook his head. The human's words echoed strangely in his ears. All his life he'd been told that the Saurian Empire was the pinnacle of civilization, that their way was the only way. Yet in the face of utter defeat, this human spoke of individual liberty and peaceful cooperation as if they were universal truths. Could it be that everything Solaris had been taught was a lie? That there was another path, a better way to live? He looked at Evans, really looked at him, and saw not a savage enemy, but a fellow sapient being, one who had shown him compassion and mercy when he had expected only death. In that moment, a seed of doubt took root in Solaris's mind, a seed that would grow and blossom into something that would shake the very foundations of the Saurian Empire. But for now, all he said was, "Perhaps we should talk." Evans led Solaris through the corridors of the human ship, the Saurian's eyes widening at the advanced technology integrated seamlessly into the vessel's design. Holographic displays and sleek interfaces lined the walls, a far cry from the clunky utilitarian consoles on Saurian warships. The lighting was soft and warm, not the harsh, sterile glare he was used to. Even the air smelled different, fresh and clean. "Your ship is remarkable," Solaris said as they walked. "I've never seen anything like it." Evans smiled. "We've come a long way. Our ships are designed for both function and comfort. We believe in taking care of our crew." He opened a door and gestured for Solaris to enter. The Saurian stepped into a spacious quarters, complete with a plush bed, a small sitting area, and a private washroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the stars. "These will be your quarters during the journey to Earth," Evans said. "If you need anything, just ask." Solaris could only nod, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding him. On Saurian ships, only the highest-ranking officers had private quarters, and even those were Spartan affairs with bare metal walls and hard bunks. As the human ship approached Earth, Solaris found himself glued to the windows, marveling at the blue-green planet growing larger before him. The humans had arranged a welcome ceremony for his arrival, and as he stepped off the ship, he was greeted by a crowd of dignitaries and curious onlookers. Over the next few days, Evans and other human officials took Solaris on a tour of Earth's major cities. The Saurian was astounded by the diversity he saw. Humans of all colors and creeds mingled together, their differences celebrated rather than suppressed. He visited grand museums and towering skyscrapers, marveling at the ingenuity and creativity of human culture. In meeting after meeting with human leaders, Solaris was struck by their openness and willingness to listen. They asked about Saurian society and culture, seeking to understand rather than judge. Slowly an idea began to take shape in Solaris's mind. What if the Saurians could learn from the humans? What if instead of conquering other species, they could work together in pursuit of common goals? It was a radical notion, one that went against everything he'd been taught. But the more time he spent among the humans, the more Solaris became convinced that it was the right path forward. His musings were interrupted by a sudden commotion outside the building where he was meeting with Earth's leaders. Alarms blared, and soldiers rushed past, shouting orders. Evans burst into the room, his face grim. "We're under attack," he said. "A Saurian fleet just dropped out of FTL and opened fire on our orbital defenses." Solaris felt his blood run cold. "That's impossible. I'm here under a flag of truce. My government would never violate that." Evans shook his head. "It seems not everyone in your government agrees with your mission. We've identified the fleet as belonging to a General Zahn. Ring any bells?" Solaris cursed under his breath. Zahn was a notorious hardliner, a fervent believer in Saurian supremacy. He must have seen Solaris's peace mission as a betrayal of everything the Empire stood for. "I have to stop him," Solaris said, standing. "This attack will ruin any chance of peace between our peoples." Evans nodded. "Agreed, but you're not facing him alone. We're in this together now." As he followed Evans out of the room, Solaris couldn't help but marvel at the strange turn his life had taken. Just days ago, he had been ready to die fighting the humans. Now he was preparing to stand with them against his own kind. The universe, it seemed, was full of surprises. The command center erupted in chaos as reports flooded in of Saurian ships appearing in orbit and launching devastating strikes on key targets across the planet. Solaris watched in horror as video feeds showed Zaan's troops storming cities, rounding up civilians and brutally suppressing any resistance. "We have to do something," Evans said, his jaw clenched. "Zaan's going to kill those people if we don't give in to his demands." One of the human leaders, an older woman with steel-grey hair, shook her head. "We can't surrender. It would be the end of our way of life." Solaris stepped forward, his heart heavy. "I may be able to help. I know Zaan and I know how the Saurian military operates. If we can get aboard his command ship, we might be able to capture him and force his troops to stand down." Evans looked at him, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "You'd be willing to do that, even though it means going against your own people?" Solaris met his gaze. "I've seen the kind of society you've built here, the values you hold dear. If Zaan wins, all of that will be destroyed. I can't let that happen." The human leaders exchanged glances, then nodded. "All right," the woman said. "What do you propose?" Over the next hour, Solaris laid out everything he knew about Saurian tactics, technology, and security protocols. He highlighted weaknesses in their ship designs, blind spots in their sensor arrays, and gaps in their communication networks that could be exploited. "Zaan's command ship will be heavily guarded," Solaris warned. "He'll have his best troops and most advanced weapons protecting him. Getting to him won't be easy." Evans leaned forward. "Then we'll need our best people on this mission. I'll handpick a team of our most skilled infiltrators and saboteurs. With your inside knowledge and their expertise, we might just pull this off." As the meeting broke up and everyone rushed to make preparations, Solaris found himself pulled aside by Evans. The human's face was etched with concern. "Are you sure about this?" Evans asked. "You'll be facing your own kind in battle. That can't be easy." Solaris looked away, his throat tight. "It's not. Some of them may even be people I know, friends, family, but I have to do what's right, for both our peoples." Evans clasped his shoulder. "I understand, and for what it's worth, I'm glad you're on our side." As Solaris walked away to gear up for the mission, he couldn't shake the sense of unease that coiled in his gut. He was about to take up arms against the very people he had sworn to serve, to protect. But he knew that if Zaan's vision of Saurian supremacy prevailed, it would mean the end of everything he had come to believe in. He thought of the vibrant human cities he had seen, the laughter of children in the streets, the simple joy of people living their lives free from oppression and fear. That was what he was fighting for now. And as much as it pained him, he knew he was willing to sacrifice everything to preserve it. The infiltration team moved silently through the corridors of Zaan's command ship, their footsteps muffled by the humming of the engines. Solaris led the way, his intimate knowledge of Saurian security protocols guiding them past patrols and surveillance systems. Evans and the human operatives followed close behind, their weapons at the ready. As they approached the bridge, a figure stepped out from a side passage. Solaris froze as he recognized the face of his old friend and mentor, Commander Vortex. The older Saurian's eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of Solaris standing alongside human soldiers. "Solaris, what are you doing with these primates?" Vortex demanded, his hand dropping to the blaster at his hip. "Have you lost your mind?" Solaris held up his hands, his voice calm and steady. "Vortex, listen to me. This invasion is a mistake. The humans aren't our enemies. We should be working towards peace, not war." Vortex shook his head, his expression hardening. "Peace? With these savages? You've spent too much time among them, Solaris. You've forgotten what it means to be a Saurian warrior." "No, old friend. I've learned that there's more to life than conquest and domination. The humans have shown me a different way, a better way." Vortex's fingers tightened around his blaster. "I don't know what lies they've fed you, but I won't let you betray our people. Stand down, Solaris. Don't make me kill you." Solaris glanced at Evans, saw the human nod almost imperceptibly. In a blur of motion, Solaris drew his own weapon and fired. The stun blast caught Vortex square in the chest, sending him crumpling to the deck. Solaris knelt beside his unconscious friend, his heart heavy. "I'm sorry, Vortex, but I have to do what's right." With Vortex neutralized, the team pushed on towards the bridge. They burst through the doors, weapons blazing, and found themselves face to face with General Zahn and his elite guard. "Solaris," Zahn snarled, drawing his own blaster. "I knew you were a traitor the moment you set foot on that human ship." Evans stepped forward, his rifle leveled at Zahn's chest. "It's over, General. Surrender now and no one else has to die." Zahn laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Surrender? To you? I'd rather die than bow to a human." With a roar, Zahn opened fire, his guards following suit. Evans and Solaris dove for cover, returning fire as they went. The bridge dissolved into chaos, energy beams crisscrossing the space as the two sides fought with desperate fury. Solaris found himself back-to-back with Evans, the human's calm presence a steadying influence in the madness. They moved as one, covering each other as they advanced on Zahn's position. But even with all their skill and determination, they were badly outnumbered. One by one the human operatives fell, until only Evans and Solaris were left standing. They crouched behind a sparking console, their ammunition running low. "Looks like this is it," Evans said, his face grim. "It's been an honor fighting alongside you, Solaris." Solaris gripped the human's arm. "The honor was mine, my friend. Let's make sure we take Zahn with us." Just as they prepared to make their final stand, a tremendous explosion rocked the ship. The reinforcements from the human fleet had arrived, and they were not holding back. The Saurian ship shuddered under the onslaught, consoles exploding and fires erupting across the bridge. In the confusion, Evans and Solaris saw their chance. They leapt from cover, charging towards Zahn with a fierce battle cry. The Saurian general barely had time to raise his weapon before they were on him, fists and blaster butts striking with merciless precision. As the battle raged on the bridge of Zahn's command ship, the Saurian general's face twisted into a malevolent grin. He slammed his fist down on a large, ominous button set into the arm of his command chair. The bridge rumbled as hidden panels slid open, revealing a massive energy cannon rising from the bowels of the ship. "Behold the instrument of your destruction, humans," Zahn crowed. "Surrender now, or I will turn this weapon on your precious Earth and reduce it to ashes." On the view screen, the human fleet closed in, their weapons hammering at the command ship's shields. But Zahn seemed unconcerned, his eyes glinting with madness as he watched the energy levels of his secret weapon climb higher and higher. Solaris and Evans exchanged a desperate look. They both knew that if that cannon fired, it would mean the end of everything they had fought for, the end of any hope for peace between their peoples. "And we have to stop him," Solaris said, his voice grim. "We have to destroy this ship even if it means sacrificing ourselves." Evans nodded, his jaw set. "I'm with you, but we need to get the rest of the team out first." Solaris grabbed Evans' arm. "No, there's no time. You have to go get everyone to the escape pods. I'll stay and overload the reactor core." Evans shook his head stubbornly. "I'm not leaving you behind. We started this together. We'll finish it together." Solaris wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in the human's eyes. He knew there would be no changing Evans's mind. "All right," he said. "Together, then." They turned to the rest of the infiltration team, both human and Saurian, who were still locked in combat with Zahn's elite guard. "Everyone, fall back to the escape pods!" Evans shouted over the din of battle. "We'll handle things here." There were shouts of protest, but the team obeyed, fighting their way towards the exits. Evans and Solaris plunged in the opposite direction, towards the ship's reactor chamber. They ran through the corridors, blasting any Saurian soldiers who tried to stop them. As they reached the massive doors of the reactor room, they found their way blocked by a contingent of Zahn's most fanatical troops. The Saurians opened fire, forcing Evans and Solaris to dive for cover. "We have to get through," Solaris shouted, popping up to shoot off a few rounds. Evans lobbed a grenade, the explosion taking out several of the guards. "Go, I'll cover you!" Solaris sprinted for the door, Evans laying down a suppressing fire behind him. He slapped the control panel and the doors slid open with a hiss. They tumbled inside, sealing the entrance behind them. The reactor core pulsed with energy, casting an eerie blue glow over the chamber. Solaris raced to the control console, his fingers flying over the keys as he initiated the overload sequence. "Step away from there, traitor," a voice snarled from behind them. Solaris and Evans spun to see Zahn standing in the doorway, flanked by his last two guards. The Saurian general's face was a mask of rage and hatred. "You've doomed us all, Solaris," Zahn spat. "Doomed our people to be slaves to these human vermin." Solaris shook his head. "No, Zahn, I've given us a chance for a better future. One where we work with other species, not against them." Zahn scoffed. "You're weak, just like your human friends. The Saurian Empire is destined to rule the stars. It is our birthright." "You're wrong," Solaris said, his voice calm and certain. "The future belongs to those who seek cooperation and understanding, not conquest and domination. And I'm willing to die to protect that future." Behind him, the reactor core began to pulse faster, the overload nearing critical mass. Zahn's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. He raised his blaster, but Evans was faster. The human's shot caught Zahn square in the chest, sending him stumbling back. The general's guards rushed forward, but Solaris and Evans met them head-on. They grappled in the pulsing light of the overloading reactor, trading blows and blaster fire. One of the guards fell to Solaris's blade, the other to Evans' marksmanship. And then it was just the two of them, standing side by side as the reactor reached its breaking point. They clasped hands, human and Saurian united in their final moments. "It's been an honor, my friend," Solaris said, his voice thick with emotion. Evans smiled, a tear tracking down his battle-stained cheek. "The honor was mine." The reactor exploded in a blinding flash of light, consuming the command ship in a ball of fiery plasma. On the bridge of the human flagship, the crew watched in stunned silence as the Saurian vessel disintegrated before their eyes. In that moment, they knew that the tide had turned, that Solaris and Evans had given their lives to secure a future of peace and unity for both their peoples. And as the light of the explosion faded, a new dawn began to rise over the galaxy, full of hope and possibility. Solaris and Zahn traded blows in a vicious melee, their fists and feet striking with bone-crushing force. They smashed into consoles and bulkheads, each trying to gain a decisive advantage over the other. Zahn's greater size and strength began to tell as he hammered Solaris with powerful blows, driving him back step by step. Evans raced to the reactor control panel, his fingers flying over the interface as he initiated the overload sequence. Warnings flashed and alarms blared, but he forced himself to focus on his task, trusting Solaris to hold off Zahn. Zahn kicked Solaris' legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the deck. The Saurian general pounced, pinning Solaris down with his superior weight. He wrapped his hands around Solaris's throat, choking the life out of him. "Traitor," Zahn snarled, his face inches from Solaris's. "You could have been a hero of the Saurian Empire. Instead, you chose to side with these weak, pathetic creatures." Solaris clawed at Zahn's arms, but his vision was darkening, his strength fading. He heard Evans shouting his name, but the human was too far away, still working to sabotage the reactor. Just as Solaris felt himself slipping into unconsciousness, a blaster shot rang out. Zahn jerked and rolled off Solaris, clutching at a smoking wound in his side. Solaris gasped for air, his vision clearing to reveal Vortex standing in the doorway, his weapon aimed at Zahn. "Stand down, General," Vortex said, his voice steady. "It's over!" Zahn staggered to his feet, disbelief and rage warring on his face. "Vortex, you too, has everyone gone mad?" "No, Zahn," Vortex replied. "I've just finally seen the truth. Solaris is right. Your way will only lead to more death and destruction. It has to end." Solaris pushed himself upright, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with his old friend. "It's finished, Zahn. Surrender now, and no one else has to die." Zahn looked from Solaris to Vortex to Evans, still hunched over the reactor controls. Something seemed to break inside him, and he sagged, all the fight going out of him. Together, Solaris and Vortex secured the general, binding his hands behind his back. Evans looked up from the control panel, his face grim. "Reactor overload in progress," he reported. "We have to get out of here now." They sprinted for the escape pods, dragging a subdued Zaan with them. They piled into the nearest one, Solaris slamming his fist on the launch button. The pod blasted away from the command ship, hurtling towards the blue-green orb of Earth far below. Behind them, a new sun bloomed as the reactor went critical, consuming Zaan's ship in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave buffeted their pod, sending them tumbling end over end. Solaris clutched at the restraints, praying they would hold. When the turbulence subsided, he looked out the viewport. The Saurian fleet hung in tatters, many of the ships drifting powerless or burning from stem to stern. As he watched, the remaining vessels began to signal their surrender, their crews no doubt demoralized by the loss of their flagship and their leader. The pod shuddered as it hit Earth's atmosphere, the heat shields glowing cherry red. They came down in a remote stretch of countryside, the impact throwing them hard against their harnesses. Then there was only stillness and the hiss of cooling metal. The pod's hatch cracked open, letting in a flood of cool, clean air and bright sunlight. Solaris stumbled out, his legs shaky from the adrenaline come-down. Evans and Vortex followed, supporting a still-dazed Zaan between them. In the distance, Solaris could see vehicles approaching, no doubt alerted by their precipitous arrival. He knew that there would be debriefings, negotiations, and hard choices ahead. But for now, he let himself savor the moment. They had done it. They had stopped Zaan, saved Earth, and perhaps paved the way for a new era of peace and cooperation between their peoples. And as he looked at the faces of his companions, human and Saurian alike, he felt a swell of hope for what the future might bring. The dust had barely settled on the battlefield when Solaris and Vortex found themselves in a new kind of fight, the struggle for peace. They sat across from human leaders, their faces still bearing the scars of recent combat, as they worked to hammer out the details of a treaty that could change the course of galactic history. The root of this conflict lies in the misunderstandings and prejudices that have divided our peoples for so long, Solaris argued, his voice passionate but weary. If we are to move forward, we must do so together, with open hearts and open minds. Vortex nodded in agreement. We have seen firsthand the cost of war, the lives lost on both sides. Let us honor their sacrifice by building a future of cooperation and mutual respect. The human leaders listened intently, their expressions a mix of hope and skepticism. They had fought hard to defend their homeworld, and the wounds of war were still fresh. But they also recognized the opportunity that lay before them, the chance to forge a new era of peace and prosperity for all. As news of the negotiations spread, a wave of change began to ripple through Saurian society. Many, especially the younger generations, had grown weary of the constant drumbeat of war and conquest. They looked to Solaris and Vortex as examples of a different way, a path of dialogue and diplomacy, instead of violence and domination. In the streets and halls of Sauria, a grassroots movement took hold, calling for an end to the rigid caste system that had defined their culture for so long. They demanded greater freedoms, more say in the decisions that shaped their lives. It was a groundswell of hope and determination, a belief that a better future was possible. But not everyone shared this vision. In the shadowy corners of Saurian society, a faction of hardliners seethed with anger and resentment. They saw the peace talks as a betrayal of everything they had fought for, a surrender to a weaker, inferior species. Their leader was Commander Rask, Zaan's former second-in-command. A fierce warrior with a fanatical devotion to the old ways, he rallied his followers with fiery rhetoric and promises of glory. "Solaris and Vortex are traitors to their own kind," Rask snarled, pounding his fist on the table. "They would have us bow and scrape before the humans, forgetting the proud legacy of our ancestors, but we will not submit. We will fight on, until every last human is crushed beneath our boots." As the day of the treaty signing approached, Rask and his loyalists put their plan into motion. They would strike at the heart of this fledgling peace, assassinating Solaris and Vortex and plunging both species back into the chaos of war. The Great Hall was packed with dignitaries from both worlds, a sea of human and saurian faces united in a shared hope for the future. Solaris and Vortex stood side by side at the podium, their voices ringing out with words of reconciliation and partnership. But even as the applause swelled, a sudden commotion erupted at the back of the room. Rask and his warriors burst in, weapons blazing, their faces twisted with hate and fury. Panic swept through the crowd as energy bolts sizzled through the air, scorching walls and shattering windows. Solaris and Vortex reacted instantly, drawing their own weapons and diving for cover. Beside them, Evans and his security team moved to engage the attackers, determined to protect the innocents caught in the crossfire. It was a scene of chaos and confusion, a whirlwind of light and sound as the two sides clashed. But even in the midst of the madness, Solaris and Vortex fought with a fierce determination, driven by the knowledge that the fate of billions hung in the balance. This was more than just another battle. It was a struggle for the soul of their species, a fight to preserve the fragile alliance they had worked so hard to build. And as they stood shoulder to shoulder with their human allies, trading shots and shouts across the embattled hall, they knew that failure was not an option. The future was theirs to shape, and they would not let it slip through their fingers, not now, not ever. The Great Hall erupted into chaos as Rask's loyalists stormed in, energy weapons blazing. Dignitaries and attendees screamed and dove for cover, overturning tables and chairs in their desperate attempts to escape the line of fire. Solaris, Vortex, and Evans reacted instantly, drawing their own blasters and moving to engage the attackers. "Get these people to safety," Evans shouted to his security team, gesturing towards the terrified crowd. "We'll handle Rask." As the human guards worked to evacuate the civilians, a group of Saurian reformists emerged from among the chaos, taking up positions alongside Solaris and his allies. They had been secretly undermining Rask's faction from within, and now they stood ready to fight for the future they believed in. Solaris locked eyes with Rask across the battlefield, the hatred and rage in his former commander's expression sending a chill down his spine. Rask leveled his blaster at Solaris, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're a disgrace to our species, Solaris," Rask snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "A traitor who would sell out his own kind for these weak, pathetic humans." Solaris shook his head, lowering his own weapon. "No, Rask, I'm trying to save our people from a cycle of violence and destruction. We have a chance to build a better future in partnership with the humans. Can't you see that?" Rask sneered. "All I see is a coward who has forgotten what it means to be Saurian. We were born to conquer, to rule, and I will not rest until every last human is ground beneath my heel." With a roar of fury, Rask charged at Solaris, firing his blaster wildly. Solaris dove aside, the energy bolts sizzling past his head. He came up in a roll, bringing his own weapon to bear, but hesitated. He didn't want to kill Rask, even after everything the commander had done. As they traded blows, dodging and weaving through the rubble of the once grand hall, Solaris began to realize that Rask was more than just a political opponent. He was a symbol of the old destructive ways of thinking that had held the Saurians back for so long. The belief in conquest and domination, the rigid adherence to a militaristic hierarchy. In that moment, Solaris understood that the only way to truly defeat Rask was not through violence, but by demonstrating the power of compassion and understanding. He lowered his blaster, holding out a hand in a gesture of peace. "Rask, please," Solaris said, his voice calm and steady. "Enough blood has been spilled in the name of our misguided cause. Think of all the sacrifices our people have made, all the lives lost. Is this really what you want our legacy to be?" Rask hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. For a heartbeat it seemed as though Solaris's words might have reached him. But then Rask's expression hardened, and he raised his blaster once more. "You weak-minded fool," he growled. "You'll die just like all the rest." Just as Rask was about to pull the trigger, a blaster bolt struck him from the side, sending him crumpling to the ground. Solaris turned to see Vortex standing there, smoke curling from the barrel of his weapon. "I'm sorry, old friend," Vortex said, his voice heavy with regret, "but you left me no choice." With Rask and his loyalists restrained and the immediate threat neutralized, an uneasy calm settled over the great hall. Solaris and Vortex exchanged a look of relief tinged with sadness, the weight of their actions heavy on their hearts. They had fought against their own people, but they knew it had been necessary to secure a future of peace. The human and Saurian dignitaries slowly emerged from their hiding spots, dusting themselves off and assessing the damage. Evans barked orders to his security team, coordinating the removal of Rask's subdued warriors and ensuring the safety of the attendees. Solaris stepped up to the podium, his voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "Today we have seen the lengths that some will go to preserve the divisions of the past, but we have also seen the strength of those who believe in a better tomorrow. Let this be a turning point, a moment where we commit ourselves to the hard work of building a lasting peace between our peoples." Vortex joined Solaris at the front, adding his own words of support. "Change is never easy, but it is necessary if we are to grow and thrive as a species. We must learn from the mistakes of our past and forge a new path forward, one based on cooperation and mutual understanding." As the ceremony concluded and the treaty was signed, Solaris felt a sense of hope mingled with trepidation. He knew that the real challenge lay ahead, in convincing his people to embrace a different way of life. In the months that followed, Solaris threw himself into the task of promoting democratic reforms and greater individual liberties among the Saurians. He traveled from city to city, speaking to crowds of his fellow citizens, urging them to let go of the rigid hierarchies that had defined their society for so long. "We have an opportunity to reshape our world," he proclaimed to a gathered throng in the capital square. "To create a society where every individual has a voice, where we are not bound by the circumstances of our birth. It will not be an easy journey, but it is a necessary one if we are to find our place in this new era of galactic cooperation." But change did not come easily to the Saurians. Many of those in positions of power, who had benefited from the old system, resisted the reforms tooth and claw. They saw Solaris as a threat to their way of life, a dangerous radical who would bring chaos and disorder to their carefully structured civilization. Solaris found himself increasingly isolated, his supporters dwindling in the face of mounting opposition. He received anonymous threats, warning him to cease his agitation or face the consequences. But he refused to be silenced, knowing that too much was at stake. On a diplomatic mission to Earth, Solaris's shuttle suddenly lurched and shuddered, alarms blaring in the cockpit. Before he could react, the craft plummeted from the sky, ploughing into the ground in a remote stretch of countryside. Solaris lay trapped in the twisted wreckage, his body broken and bleeding. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind wandered to the battles he had fought, both physical and ideological. He thought of the sacrifices he had made, the friendships he had forged and lost. "Perhaps I was foolish to think I could change an entire society," he mumbled to himself, his voice weak and distant. "Maybe some differences run too deep to be bridged." But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Solaris clung to the belief that his struggle had not been in vain. He had seen the spark of change in the eyes of his fellow Saurians, the yearning for a better future that could not be extinguished. He knew that others would take up the mantle of reform, carrying forward the work he had begun. As he teetered on the brink of unconsciousness, Solaris heard the whir of engines, the crunch of footsteps on shattered glass. He braced himself, expecting to be greeted by human faces, his allies from a world away. But when the hatch was wrenched open, it was Saurian hands that reached in to pull him free. Through the haze of pain, Solaris recognized the faces of his comrades, the reformists who had stood with him through the trials of the past months. "For you're not alone, Solaris," one of them said, gripping his hand tightly. "Your message has reached more ears than you know. We're with you, no matter what comes. As he was loaded onto a stretcher, Solaris felt a flicker of renewed hope. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he knew now that he was part of something greater than himself, a movement that transcended the boundaries of species and culture, united by a common vision of a galaxy at peace. Solaris awoke to the sterile white of a hospital room, the steady beep of monitors, a comforting reminder of his survival. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he saw the faces of his friends gathered around him, human and saurian alike. Evans stood at his bedside, his hand resting on Solaris's shoulder. "You gave us quite a scare there, my friend, but I should know better than to underestimate your resilience by now." Vortex stepped forward, his expression a mix of relief and determination. "The attack on your shuttle has only strengthened the resolve of those who share your vision. More and more Saurians are speaking out, demanding change. You've started something that cannot be stopped, Solaris." Solaris managed a weak smile, his heart swelling with gratitude and renewed purpose. He knew that the fight was far from over, that there would be more obstacles and setbacks to come. But as he looked at the faces of his companions, he knew that he would not have to face them alone. Together they would build a new future, one step at a time. A future where humans and Saurians could live and work side by side, learning from each other and growing stronger in the process. It was a dream worth fighting for, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.